Welcome to a Celtic state of mind. It's 12:30, which means it's time for the bulletin. It doesn't matter if it's an international break, Brian Degnan, because we go out every weekday and we cover every game as well. Sometimes we go out 7 days a week. And this week and last week is no different. We will touch on the international football, what it meant for Celtic's players, what it might mean for our preparations for this weekend's game against Motherwell. What is your take, Brian, on the international thing? Are we playing too much international football?
I think so, yeah. It's the extra competition's been added in and stuff, and it does. Look, I quite like international football. I quite like watching the games. I like obviously seeing Scotland play, but I'm on tenterhooks watching them because I'm convinced somebody's going to get a really bad injury, and it does get to the point where it feels less special because it's sort of diluted getting, and the fact that when you live down south, no pub in the country shows Scotland games, so I couldn't even get to watch the game at a pub last night. I had to watch it in the house. So that's a factor for me. But no seriousness, yeah, I think it's getting to be a bit diluted now. I think keep it special, keep the World Cup, the Euros, and that's it.
Well, the comments I was referring to were back on the early part of the week. Thibaut Courtois, Real Madrid and Belgium goalkeeper, talking about plans to make the Euros and the World Cup basically every year. So instead of every 2 years there being an international competition, there'll be one every single year. I mean, if that kind of thing kicks in, his argument was we don't get a break as a footballer. And you get this argument. I mean, we've been seeing it all morning this morning. Steve Bruce has arrived again to take training at Newcastle. The sack is hanging over his head. And I'm looking at it saying, well, come Monday morning, he might not have to go to his work, but he'll have £8 million in the bank. And people do still have that thing about footballers. Stop complaining, you get all this money. But I found it really refreshing when these comments were made. We're not robots, he said. We can't keep playing. You don't get a break. That concerns me a bit because I know that there were no Celtic starters last night for Scotland. But over the piece, we've got a lot of international players out there, and you just want them to get a break, Brian.
You do, because it's not just the fact that the players are the robots, and you do have sympathy for players because they are human. They're going all the time. But what happens is the effect of them being overused. What that does is it affects their game, it affects the clubs, it affects teams. And say for Celtic, for example, I'd mentioned it before about Abada, thinking, I know he's been a wee bit inconsistent, but I think that's because he's playing all the time. And I think that gets to a point where, they're just trudging through and getting through games, and they can't give their best. It's like we see Tom Rogic playing 2 games in a week. He just looks a different player. He's no got it in him. So I think it has a real detrimental effect in club level. And the reality is, we've got international players and they're well paid, but there's some international teams that, they're small leagues that don't have, the resources. So these players aren't that well paid, and that they're doing all this work as well. And if they get injured, the clubs can't afford to replace them, and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot more considerations, I think, for sort of countries sort of individual FAs about it.
Oh, yeah, but again, the dollar always wins, doesn't it, Brian, when it comes to football? We're keen to get you involved on the comment section. Thank you for joining us on various different platforms. We are going out on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and also on Twitch. Good afternoon to Monty. And Paul Cockwell comes in to say, hi, guys. Hope all had good weekend. Scotland game and boxing. A great weekend. Don't know if you're a bit of the boxing fan, Brian, but some encounters cannot be ignored. So, yeah, big shout out from Paul. We're going to be looking at the aftermath of the international break. The biggest concerns for me could be, if a player comes through unscathed, brilliant. But then we've got players like Kyogo and Rogic, the aforementioned Rogic, who have travelled thousands of miles. And then, they're coming back to training tomorrow to prepare for Saturday's game against Motherwell. And I'm wondering, looking at the kind of opportunities and hopefully hitting the ground running after the international break, is this an opportunity? Would it be a wise move to perhaps bench Kyogo for the game against Fir Park and introduce Giakoumakis and give him the opportunity, not because Kyogo's not been playing well, Brian, but simply because of the international exertions?
Yeah, I think it's a sensible option, isn't it? When you think about it as well, if you put Giakoumakis on, and I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, but if you put him on and he's not doing great, you've got Kyogo to come off the bench. Now, having that sort of firepower off the bench is something we've not had for quite a while. So you've always got that impact. And, you know, the way Motherwell play, they are quite a physical side, although they try and play football, but it might be nice to throw a wee spanner in the work, because they'll probably be preparing for the assumption that Kyogo's going to start, whereas no one knows about Giakoumakis, we don't know about him, they don't know about him, so it'd be nice to throw it in from a tactical perspective. I'm actually not a huge fan of squad rotation, if I'm honest. I think you should always play your sort of best team, unless, of course, you've got multiple games in a week and then you can switch it up at the end, but rotation for the sake of it, I'm not a big fan of, so I'm kind of split. I think just given the exertions Kyogo's probably had travelling wise, and I don't know if he played right enough against against Australia, but yeah, I think it's good. Plus, as well, we just want to see the new striker, right? You just want to see your new player and see what he's like, and see if you get a bit about him, and instead of talk about it and analyse it and get excited. So, yeah, I would like to see him play, whether Kyogo starts or not.
I think more than anything, I do want to see more of Giakoumakis, Brian. I mean, we're going to be talking about various other strikers as we go through this conversation. But on the subject of this, you know, we did get a fleeting appearance from him against Leverkusen. He looked like a completely different package, which I think, you know, is useful for Celtic. Last season would have been ideal to have something different up front. We didn't seem to have much options up there. But again, how on earth are we going to get him up to match fitness? I mean, I think it's absurd that we've signed a player who, you know, 7 weeks later isn't match fit anyway. But how do we get him to that level if we don't give him games? And I think that we can't move Kyogo. I think that much is clear, Brian. We can't move him to the left. He's far less effective out left. We've seen that against Rangers. We've got to play Kyogo through the middle when fit. But I think when we get the opportunity, and I think Saturday is an opportunity, bench him, and he's always a tremendous option on the bench. We've been talking about a fair bit about January, and I had a conversation on Twitter, if you call it a conversation. We had a bit of a back and forth with one of the ACSOM viewers on Twitter, talking about the fact that, you know, we were sold this idea that we were going through not only a rebuild, Brian, but a restructure. And I think that they go hand in hand. I mean, we're rebuilding the team on the park, and we're restructuring the club, apparently, behind the scenes. And it's almost as if that restructure has been put on hold. We haven't heard anything from the club. We've not really heard anything since Dominic Mackay left. We're never going to get the reasons why he left, and I understand that. But in terms of the restructure, the reason I'm bringing it up, as many of our viewers might be rolling their eyes, the reason I'm bringing it up is because if we don't restructure, Brian, it's almost as if we're just living from window to window, from hand to mouth almost.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I've recently just written an article about this, about the type of structure we should have in place. So it ties in quite well. But the answer to this question also ties in with the point about fitness. So when people talk about interim structure, you know, it's not necessarily saying, oh, we need to get new people on the board, or we need to get this or that. It's about the actual how it affects us on the park. That structure, that background is directly affecting players. If we had proper, you know, sports coaching, I know we've got the guy Anton in, but he's also just starting. You know, proper top level fitness conditioning coaches, sports scientists, physiotherapists, you know, all those guys in place there, the players would be fitter, which then affects the product on the park, right? If you've got someone like a director of football, sporting director, technical director, the names varies, but someone in the role who's in charge of these department heads, who does all that recruitment, what you've got is you've got all these things working in the background to produce the 11 men on the park and produce that product. So it's like making a film, right? So you get your actors on set, but if the producers know there, and the directors know there, and the camera guys are there, and all these other things in the background aren't in place, you can't make a movie. You can have the actors saying the lines, you can put a camera there, but it's not the same thing. At the moment, you know, Ange is the director, the writer, the producer, the caterer. He's doing everything at Celtic just now. And it has to change. Actually, I don't know if this has ever happened before, but it's the 13th of October, and we still don't have an official assistant manager, first team coach. Now, I know Kennedy's there, but I don't even know if he's technically assistant manager or if he's just a coach now. Ange doesn't actually have a backroom team that he's called his own. That's madness. That is insanity. We've heard nothing for the board. We don't know if we're going to get a director of football. And even if we do that, what seems strange is we're putting the cart before the horse, because you're going to basically be asking Ange his input on getting a guy in that shares his vision who could sack him. Imagine hiring your own boss. It's insanity. So I've been kind of rambling about the shambles at Celtic for a while, and I know people get fed up hearing it, but it's not about, it directly affects the impact in the park. It just does. If you support Celtic, you want Celtic to be successful and you want the team to do well. I know people say, just get a manager that can win, or just get a striker that can score goals or defend, all that stuff, and that's all well and good. But there's more goes into it than just putting that there. There's a lot more in. Look at any successful club in Europe just now. Look at Red Bull Salzburg. I know they've got money coming in from Red Bull, but they're not mega rich. They don't spend that much. They just recruit very, very well because they've got a scouting network set up with a vision for the club, and the club's got continuity season upon season upon season. It's got a vision, a purpose, an identity, and a philosophy. And at the moment, Ange is the only person, in my mind, trying to put that into play at Celtic just now.
Well, the thing is, I don't think you should apologise for talking about it, because it's massive. You can't talk about the product on the park without looking at what's happening above the football department and that overarching structure. I mean, we spoke a while back during the period where we were hearing about, the Fergal, Harkin, Maresca dream team coming in, but the whole reason behind that was there was a synergy between that team. So it wasn't as if you were just cobbling together a team and saying, well, hopefully this works out. And if it doesn't, one or both are going to leave. We've now got a situation where we were looking to Eddie Howe to come with his entire backroom team. And that involved a lot of different staff members, but also he was going to be pivotal in appointing the director of football. So it does go back to your point, Brian. How can you appoint your boss who can then sack you if things aren't going well? But yeah, it does seem as though it's fractured at this moment in time. And even when we're talking about how we're going to line up on Saturday or how January is going to go once we dip back into the transfer market, if the structure isn't in place and there's no synergy between the manager and those people making the decisions about the personnel coming in, you're left with a situation where if a player comes in, and even if they are capable, the manager might not find a place for them in the team. And I don't mean that in terms of Postecoglou, because I think what he's done so far is he has definitely utilised the players at his disposal. He has looked at them without prejudice, if you like. It's almost as if nobody's his man and anyone else who was here before, you're not in favour. I mean, he's played Tony Ralston, Brian, which I think is a shining example of the fact that he will utilise whatever is at his disposal, regardless of whether or not he's brought the players in. But when we go into January and we go back into the transfer market, I think, historically, January transfer markets haven't been great for Celtic. But one player that we brought in, and it didn't work out for him, but he's gone on to prove that he might have been a good option, was Patrick Klimala. And we haven't really been speaking about him. Now, I'm not saying he would have been the answer to all our ails last season. I don't think anything would have sorted out Celtic last season. But what you had there was a situation where a player was brought in, Brian, and he wasn't brought in by the manager, quite clearly, right? I mean, all you need to do is read the comments by the former manager. We're not going to labour comments made by Neil Lennon. It's all been covered. But it was quite clear that there were certain players at that football club that he didn't play a part in bringing in. So what then happens is the manager doesn't have the full belief in that player, right? And he barely plays for Celtic. But he leaves for a very small profit, in actual fact. He leaves the club. But he goes on and he is contributing well to his new club. And it begs the question, why didn't we retain his services? Why have we been waiting 7 weeks on Giakoumakis to come in and get fit? Why are we running at this moment in time with a couple of strikers? We're actually we're lacking in that department to the point where in January we must go out and buy another striker. And I think this all comes down to the main point that we made at the top of the show, Brian. It comes down to the structure, because if you've got the structure in place, then none of this is even questioned, because you're bringing in players as part of a structure. So the manager and the director of football and the director of recruitment are all working in synergy. And these players are brought in and they're being utilised to their full. I don't think we utilised a player like Klimala. I'm just using him as an example because he's doing pretty well over in the MLS at the moment, Brian.
Well, you're right. It's a bigger problem than Klimala. And this is, I think, sometimes we tend to sort of project things onto people. So when I talk about Ange, I'm really thinking of his philosophy, and I think that's what Celtic's philosophy should be. So sometimes I get defensive about Ange, because I'm defensive of that philosophy and that mindset he's got. With Klimala, it's the same. So it's indicative of a bigger problem. So Klimala himself might not set the world alight, but as you say, it's the fact that when you're reflecting on it now, he would have probably fit far better into Postecoglou's style of play than Ayeti. You know, he just would have. Now, this is what I mean about structure, right? So indulge me for a second. So say, for example, Ange, or an Ange-like figure, was director of football. So he says, right, we want Celtic, we want our brand, we want our team, whoever's in charge, whoever the coach is, we want them to play attacking football, you know, really intense. So for that, we need X, Y, and Z players. We need players that are young, fit, that can handle that pace. So even if Ange leaves, even if the manager leaves, because that structure's in place and it's the same thing, we're going to find a coach that matches the style we want. We're not going to then try and change the whole club to match the coach. So say when Lennon get binned and Kennedy took over, if the club had a structure in place and a clear vision, we could have been signing players for the new coach coming in, because you wouldn't need to know who the new coach was, because you're playing the same way. So if you get young players that are fast, strong, good passes of the ball, play a high pressing game, you find a coach that accommodates that. So you buy these players in, and you can start. It doesn't matter who's buying them at that stage. If it's Peter Law or Dermot Desmond or John Kennedy or Gavin Stratton or the canteen lady, it doesn't make any difference, because if they're buying players that fit the structure and fit the system, it doesn't matter who's in charge. Because when they come in, he's got a squad of X amount, 22 players, 23 players, who all can play the type of football that Celtic play. And then your coach in. For viewers that might think I'm talking absolute nonsense, Google Borussia Dortmund. So Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool, he didn't, when he took over at Dortmund, that style of football was in place. That strategy was all in place. One of his best signings was Sadio Mane. Where did he come from? Red Bull Salzburg. Google them. They've got the exact same structure in place. A guy we spoke about who was linked to Man United is linked to Newcastle, Ralf Rangnick. His entire footballing philosophy changed German football, transformed it, because whoever was coming in, whether it was Thomas Tuchel at Dortmund or Klopp or whoever, they all played a certain brand of football. The coach would just basically to motivate them, inform them, change tactics during a game, what a first team coach does or a manager does. But he didn't need to worry about coming in. But what we've got at Celtic just now, say for example, Ange goes tomorrow, right? Off, kaput, sacked, and Steve Clarke comes in. You couldn't get more opposing footballing philosophies. So that would mean the work that Ange has done so far would have to all get thrown out. You have to go back and start again with a manager who's a completely different philosophy and completely different style of play, and he won't like the same players either. And the players up there might not fit that system. So you're back to square one again in January. It's insanity what we're doing just now.
See, the thing, Brian, the way that you've described it there, you've actually brought up a name that I had listed that I was going to bring up, in Ralf Rangnick. Because, we're always keen to get guests on. We've had literally hundreds of guests on a Celtic State of Mind over the years, from the world of football, music, business, politics, etc., etc. A lot of the shows with those particular guests preceded the ACSOM Bulletin, so check them all out on the YouTube. But there's been some really interesting insight, and I did approach Ralf Rangnick for an interview, and he responded and politely declined. That's fine. I can take a knockback from time to time, Brian. But he did decline. But it was to talk about his football philosophy. Now, if a club has the structure in place, you are employing a manager to fit your structure. You're not employing a manager and then everything else has to fit his ideals. And I think we've kind of suffered just in recent history from that. So we are ticking along, and Neil Lennon leaves first time round, and we appoint Ronnie Deila. Ronnie Deila's got his own philosophy, his own style of play, and undoubtedly certain players within the club didn't fit that identity. And then you've got that transitional period. By the time some of them transition and some of them leave, Ronnie Deila himself leaves, and we bring in another manager with a completely different philosophy, ideology, style of play. And so it begins again. At the point that Brendan Rodgers came in, though, I think that was the opportunity for us to completely restructure the club so that from top to bottom, this football ideology, the philosophy, the style of play was implemented at every single level. And I'm talking from first team through the Colts team down to the youth teams, so that there was this pathway into the first team. And I think that was the best possible time to do it was when Brendan Rodgers was in charge. And yeah, someone has to hit the Brendan Rodgers gong, because apparently we need to shut up about Brendan Rodgers and shut up about Neil Lennon. But some of the issues that we've got, Brian, actually precede this season and last. I mean, they've been in the works for a long time, and we're still struggling to turn that massive vessel round and get it back on track. Now, Ange Postecoglou comes in, and again, he's got a completely different kind of vision for the club. So I think we need to get to the point where the vision is the club's vision, and everybody that you bring in matches that vision, be that a director of football, a manager, a right back, it doesn't matter. You need to match the vision of the club, and I don't think we've got that yet. It's fine saying, we want to play entertaining football. But to get to that point, there's a lot more layers you need to get through to produce entertaining football. And then you start putting the people in place. And it's unfortunate that the start of that restructure was by replacing the CEO and replacing Peter Lawwell with Dominic Mackay. That's not worked out, and we're in a bit of limbo at the moment. I think the silence from the club is deafening just now, Brian, and it's very, for me, on a Celtic state of mind, and yeah, this is the first time I've appeared this week, by the way, not because I'm lazy, just because obviously I want other people to have a voice on the show, and I'll try and limit my ACSOM Bulletin appearances to one a week, but I am in the background listening and looking at comments, etc. The reason I'm doing it today, incidentally, Brian, is because I will be away tomorrow. I will be crossing the border and going down to London. So we'll be talking about that a wee bit later in the show as well. But in doing so, and in having this platform that we've built up over a period of years, obviously we were then getting access into club pressers, etc. And what we hoped would happen is that we would have more access to ask this type of question. What's happening with the structure? What's happening with the director of football, the head of recruitment, etc., etc. But we haven't really had that. So we got the introductory event. I don't know if we call it memorable or infamous, but the one that everybody can remember, certainly, Dom Mackay and Ange Postecoglou. And you kind of thought, well, this would be great. Even every 6 months, if you could get access to the CEO and ask them these hard-hitting questions that we are seeing day in, day out on the comments field that go beyond the kind of what we're watching on the football park. But it seems to have gone all a bit quiet. And that's a wee bit disappointing. But I think that comes down to the fact that at the moment, we have a bit of a rudderless ship, Brian.
Yeah, it's very unusual what's happening just now, because it's not to be negative about the club, but it's just that it's concerning because we don't know. I mean, the club say to us, look, these are the things we're going to try and implement over the next 18 months, and laid it out. It says, rest assured, we're working in the background. This is what we're going to try and get to. This is the point we want to get to. Your support's always, appreciated. That's it. You know what I mean? They could record this and make that statement out and release it. You would go, okay, I see where we're going. It's the radio silence is a concern for me. And I think the reason I get no wound up, but the reason I'm quite passionate about this sort of change in mentality is because I think Celtic's a club of unlimited potential. I think if you look at the teams, and people talk about budgets, but budget aside, like there's teams that are outstripping us in terms of how they go about their business. Now look at Brentford. Brentford were mocked, I remember, years ago because basically they were using analytics to pick their players.
Yeah.
And this sort of idea of we'll pick a certain type of player, and that'll be it, and they'll fit into a certain mould. And then look at them now, they're absolutely, they're doing really, really well in the Premier League because they've had that foresight now. Brentford and Celtic, even if you take the English league money out of it, in terms of how they went about their business, they've been incredibly profitable, incredibly smart, and incredibly successful. You imagine applying that, but to Celtic, with the worldwide fan base, the branding opportunities, the access to European competition. If you could just implement a real savvy structure, I remember before, I don't know if it was LOL, so I can't get into that, but somebody was talking about making us like Ajax essentially, where we get the best young players around, bring them through the system, sell them on at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. We've not done that. What we've done is we've bought externally and sold them on for profit. We've not developed anyone, and that comes back to the structure, right? Just to ring that bell, because if you had younger players, and I think we're going to talk about loan players later, but if you had players, from under 12s playing the passing game, all about technique, all about pace, all about fitness, and that mentality went through the team. If you had an injury crisis like the one we're having, or the one we had recently, you could dip straight into your reserves, straight into one of these younger guys and put them right in the first team, because they play the same system the same way. It's astonishing to me. You mentioned Patrick Kamala earlier. It's astonishing to me we didn't have a reserve striker to call on. Or a 17-year-old striker. We went, look, wee man, here's your chance. Like a Simon Donnelly of old to go off the bench. There you go, wee man. A Birchall. Guys like that. It's insane that a club of Celtic size, for me, doesn't have a go-to, player they can just bring for the youth. Because if they were all playing the same way, the same thing, it wouldn't matter. You just put them straight in and give them their chance. That's the way forward-thinking clubs work. And as I say, we're a great club. We're just not a very well-run one. And I know we've had success domestically, but we've got to get out of that mentality of just thinking it's about, this season and this season alone. It's about what happens where we're going to be in 10 seasons' time.
See, the thing is, it all feeds in to the big melting pot of discussion. So we've started off talking about the structure of the club. But you're absolutely right. When you're talking about what are the visions, or what is the vision of Celtic Football Club, if you read the last statement from the annual accounts, it would appear that what we want to do is we want to bring in players and make money off them. And we're good at that. But the point you make there, how many of them are we reading through our own system? Well, it's almost one a generation now. I mean, yeah, Kieran Tierney was that player. And we know that he obviously was sold for a massive amount of cash. Before that was probably McGeady. Maloney came in and we sold him. You could maybe accumulate several others like McManus and Craig Beattie and add all the combined amounts up to try and justify that the academy system is, bearing fruit in that respect. But I don't think it is, especially when you look at the way that we did it in the 60s, the 70s and the 80s. There was a dry period, there was a lull in the 90s, which seemed to coincide with Celtic's lack of any kind of identity or direction at that time as well, Brian. But for generations before that, in fact, go further back to the 1950s, and Bobby Collins and Willie Fernie, and these people were all being sold for big profits. We were rearing these players, and we did it for a long time. Every now and again, we'll do it to try and justify that the system's working. And Kieran Tierney, for example, I'd have rather kept Kieran Tierney and built the team around them. But you're absolutely right. The whole thing feeds in, and it's a discussion we've had before, particularly for a striker, whereby we haven't been able to, for some time, call upon somebody who's tearing it up, with the coach team or with one of the youth teams who's scoring goals for fun. Used to do it all the time, bring them into the first team. We had an absolute procession of strikers that we did that with. We've not done it for a long time, and that means that the structure is not working. But I totally agree with you. You're talking about a different kind of approach, a different vision, and that begs the question, in order to get it, Brian, do we need change at the top? And I know that the guys touched on this on Monday. This was on the back of comments made, and I think an article written by Roger Mitchell. And again, go into the back catalogue on the YouTube channel, because we interviewed Roger Mitchell, I think about a year and a half ago. It's on the channel. And I think that he divides opinion. But I always find what Roger Mitchell says very interesting in respect of Scottish football as a whole, but also in regards to Celtic. And he's a Celtic fan. He doesn't hide that. He is a Celtic fan. And he was talking about the vision and the direction of the club. People instantly, because such is the nature of social media, Brian, were on top of him saying, well, you didn't have the money to kind of do this. Well, you can have the money, but you also need to have the vision. Dermot Desmond's got the money. Does he have the vision to implement such systems that would actually mean that we were looking towards maybe success outside of domestic football. And the one suggestion I always keep going back to is someone who has the passion for Celtic and the knowledge of being a Celtic supporter, but also has that backing and would offer some new ideas and a new approach. And I've said it before, and I think it's Willie Hockey. I think he is the man who is built for a new era at Celtic. Do you think that because fans like you and I and the people who I'm going to be bringing into the comments section are able now a lot easier to communicate and share ideas, and I personally, I can speak from a personal perspective, I feel a lot more informed about such dealings at Celtic because of this, because of platforms like A Celtic State of Mind and others, right back to the fanzine days. I always give a shout out to Not The View, because back in the 80s and 90s, I knew what was going wrong simply because of that fanzine and because of what was written in that fanzine. And that's why I was getting behind Save Our Celts and Celts for Change and the fan movement and eventually Fergus McCann. I'm not saying that we are as powerful as a voice as the street movements back in the 80s and the 90s, but what we can be is we can be informed through speaking to other people on this channel and taking on board what's happening in the comments section, Brian. And I think that, you know, I keep going back to the point that we might be at the very early stages of revolution at Celtic. There may well be changes. And I go back to the 80s and the 90s, and I'm not comparing per se that era with this, because we were in a shambolic state for different reasons back then. We are a very cash-rich club and a very successful club now, but I think a lot of fans still want change, Brian. And I remember looking at the kind of roots of that change being in about 87, 88. That's the whole reason Not The View was set up. It didn't happen until 1994, though. And I'm looking at the situation that we're in at the moment, and it's not because we've simply lost a league title and we've lost 10 in a row. It's because there are inherent issues at Celtic Football Club behind the scenes. Do you think we're at that stage? We're at the roots of some kind of movement in the next 5 years?
It depends. So I think we need it. I just don't know it's going to happen. I think, you know, if you look at any business, right, any businesses change often. So CEOs are changed maybe for 4 or 5 years. Most big companies, CEOs change all the time. And, you know, in terms of things on the board and stuff like that, and changing CEOs and changing people in these positions, the reason it's pertinent is because you need diversity at these levels. And I don't just mean racial diversity or gender diversity. It's diversity of thought, diversity of tactic, of strategy. At the moment, what we've had for the past while, and this is why I don't think it will change, is you've got Dermot Desmond who's put money into Celtic. So then you get a CEO who's very strong, very powerful, very confident, that says to him, right, Dermot, I can find a way to get money back into the club, keep us cash rich, keep us competing. Will you allow me to do that? Yes, of course. Boom. He puts these people in place that facilitate him doing that, and then the rest has been history, right? Because Celtic have been successful domestically until recently, and we've been, you know, used to it yourself. We're cash rich, we're doing well financially. So I understand from their perspective why they'd be hesitant to change it. And while we'll never know, I think that's why Don Mackay didn't fit, because you've got a bunch of people on the board for a long time. You've got a guy who's CEO for many years who had a way of working. And if you're used to that and you're at the top level and you're making money and your business models, you know, it's still working, you're still, you know, making money, you're still successful. And some new guy can rock the boat and change things and maybe let you go arrange things. Are you going to go, yeah, that's fine, let's change everything and try a new tact? No. You're a football person like us, like everyone watching. Whether you agree with our sentiments, and I say our as in you and I, Paul, not ACSOM, it's a collective. If you agree with those sentiments, you want those changes. But if you're a businessman and you're at a high level and you're well paid and you're comfortable and things are ticking along nicely, are they prepared to rock the boat and change things? For me, I don't think they will. I think it would take something really seismic for them to have a big, you know, power shift at the highest levels of the club in terms of board and like guys like Dermot Desmond. But this is where it's maddening, because they could stay that way and just get a football man in. It's like a sporting director or whatever, and they run the football club whatever way, as long as it's still profitable. They run that, and it benefits the fans, and it benefits the club, and it benefits the older business mode. And then the more successful you're in club, the more money you're making. Over time, they'll drift off anyway and retire and move on, and it'll organically change. So there is I don't want to say an easy fix, a simple fix. It won't be easy, it will take time. But if they just change fundamentally a couple of things of how they approach their business, they can please everybody. But at the moment, they're pleasing themselves. And because the Celtic fan base is so loyal, we're going to always enjoy the product. It's like McDonald's, isn't it? You're always going to eat McDonald's. It doesn't matter who's in charge. If suddenly you get a portion of fries that size as opposed to that size, you still go and pay the money because you like McDonald's. But we're still going to watch Celtic because we love Celtic and we'll always cheer them on and we'll support them. So it doesn't really matter for the operative zones as long as we're doing it. And I'm not suggesting we all go on strike and don't go to games. I'm not suggesting that for a second. My point is, I just don't see, from their perspective, why they would feel the need to change. Although from our perspective, we certainly see the need for change.
Now, I think the biggest learning point from the Dominic Mackay experiment stroke project stroke era actually, suggests that they are very resistant to that kind of change. And that's the biggest worry for me. As I say, always keen to bring the comments up. First one, Paddy Lavery. Give a shout out to my stepfather, Hugh Cameron, ex-Kelly player, but a huge Celtic fan. Paddy, come back into the comments and tell me, was this the same Hugh Cameron that also played for Ayr United alongside the late, great Johnny Doyle? I think that was after his Kilmarnock career. Let me know, because he would have been playing alongside a couple of ex-Celts in that team, because Joe Felipe also played. And Joe is a Celtic season ticket holder and a huge Celtic fan. Also, let us know your thoughts in the comment section about where Celtic are going, the direction. I think that Jim Orr speaks so well about it because he was, so involved and immersed in the Save Our Celts movement, which preceded Celts for Change, which obviously worked hand in hand with Fergus McCann. And he spoke about the fact that, like you just said there, Brian, it was so hard to try and get Celtic fans on board, even back then when it was pretty clear that we were directionless, because you've got such a love for the club. We don't see it as a product. We don't look at Celtic. Celtic's not a fashion accessory. It doesn't come in and out of fashion. And I think when we're talking about the ownership of Celtic, it's prevalent in football just now because of everything that's happening at Newcastle. I mentioned Steve Bruce earlier on and the fact that he's maybe facing removal from his position. The reason for that is because they brought in new owners. I've had quite a few really good discussions with Kevin Graham, probably a wee bit earlier than people would have expected, about a change of ownership at Celtic. And Kevin always raised the question, or even would some people call it a dilemma, some people probably wouldn't, regarding where the money comes from. Imagine this big takeover happened and where the money would come from. Would it actually concern enough fans? Well, you look at what happened last week with Newcastle, and you look at the reaction of a great number of Newcastle fans, just so happy that Mike Ashley's out and there's a takeover and we're now this rich club. They don't really care where the money comes from, a lot of them, Brian.
Yeah, and that's it's one of the things with Celtic that I find interesting. And as much as I've been sort of, I don't have been overly critical of the board. I think they need to change the direction, but they've also been successful. But one of the things that maybe to their credit is the fact we've never had, renamed the stadium, the Red Bull Parkhead Celtic Arena. And, we've not had this influx of cash into the club. And I'm very surprised one of these teams or one of these big consortiums hasn't tried to buy over Celtic. Maybe they have in the past and they've just been rebuffed. But, I think the people that run Celtic have got the best interests of Celtic at heart. They want to be successful. I just don't think they're doing it the right way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think Desmond sits and goes, ha ha ha, hope you lose the league again. I think he passes it to Celtic and he loves it. Of course he does. But it doesn't mean, he can be blinkered as well and just be satisfied doing things a certain way. And I'm maybe some big consortium has come in to try and buy us. I don't fancy being part of the City Group. I like Celtic where we are. I like our roots. I like how we go about our business. Just sort of tying in this, you talk about the guys coming, or the people coming in buying Newcastle. Remember when Man City got taken over and they just went nuts, spent loads of money and didn't really success at first. It didn't really work. And
some might say that's because Mark Hughes was in charge. I disagree.
No, your pal Mark Hughes, don't let me hear you saying that, you're raging. But one of the big changes they did was when they got the guy who's Pep Guardiola's boss, our sporting director at Barcelona, who's still there just now. When they got him in at first, what did he do? He changed completely the dynamic of the club, and they've been really successful since. It's like these things we keep harking back to. And I'll keep doing it because I think it's important. You know how Man City play. You know how Dortmund play. You know how Liverpool play.
Yep.
You know how
that's the philosophy. That's inbuilt, absolutely.
So when these people come in to buy Newcastle, or when they come in to buy Man City, however they come in to buy, they're smart enough people to go, right, there's the money, but we need to make sure there's an infrastructure in place that's going to have long-term sustainability. Because you don't make the amount of money they've made by being silly, right? And take that back to Celtic, the current board, they've been successful as well, but the way their business model works is what's ultimately no taking us forward. It's sustainable. So we could be having this conversation in 20-year time, and we could still be, cash rich, we could still be doing functioning well as a business, but it's a club, it's a team, it's a footballing side, which is what we are, what we love. Are we moving forward? Until there's a change in thought, we're not going to. And it doesn't necessarily... Look, if I never have to say Celtic board again in my entire life, I'd be delighted. I'd be over the moon to never worry about who's in charge or what's going on behind the scenes if things just function smoothly. So that the product we see in the park, that's what you're invested in, good and bad. If it wasn't so... If I wasn't so concerned about the state of the club behind the scenes, I want to not be able to be bothered about it. It's just I don't see when that's going to happen.
See the thing though, Brian, I don't think you should ever make any apology for shining a light on deficiencies at the club. Be that we need another right back, or you know what, at the very highest echelons of the club, there needs to be change. I don't think that there should be any apology for that, because Celtic fans were at the forefront of that back in the 80s and 90s. And the club were saved. If you don't do it, if you bury your head in the sand and just want more players and more buys and just talk about what's happening on the park, then as a football fan, don't be surprised when the club crumbles, around about you, because that's happened in the past. We know who I'm talking about now. Alfred comes in. Welcome back, Alfred. You are a regular contributor, and we do appreciate it. The models are out there. We should follow them if it is good for the club. I agree with Brian. The models are out there, and there's nothing wrong with seeing something that's successful and then trying to implement it. And I think not just at Celtic, but Scottish football as a whole, Brian, we've been talking for years about how the German structure works and how healthy German football is. When are we going to start actually implementing some of those methods into Scottish football? We don't seem to do it. Brian Watt comes in. Welcome to the show, Brian. And I think is that Andy Tom? My eyesight's not the best. I think that's Andy Tom on your avatar. Don Mackay mentioned about looking at models such as Brentford. Who knows what's going on now? This is the problem. The silence at the moment is deafening in relation to where the club is headed, to the point where we're at that stage where we just want another win against Motherwell on Saturday. We're looking ahead to European football next week. And then, we've got one eye on January and the transfers that might come in as well. We'll talk all about that as well, Brian. But let me go down a wee tangent for a moment. I mentioned earlier that tomorrow, me and some of the other ACSOM comrades are going down to London. The reason we're going down there is because so many of you tune in to ACSOM, and you've put us on the map, basically. And as a result of that, we've been nominated for a trio, or a treble, as we used to like to call it, Brian, of awards down at the Football Content Awards. Now, they're not alternative awards. You could be nominated as a football club. I think Celtic are nominated, actually, this year. But we are nominated for 3, which is absolutely already a great achievement as far as I'm concerned. But as I say, it's because of the people tuning in, getting involved in our broadcasts and supporting the channel as much as you possibly can, that's allowing us to go down there. And hopefully all the hours that we spend talking about Celtic will be vindicated with our appearance tomorrow at the awards ceremony tomorrow night. Not sure where it's taking place, but it's all booked. I'll just turn up, obviously, and get, I've got my ticket. I just haven't had a time to look at it. But it's down in London somewhere. And there's one of the club categories where we're up against like AC Milan and Barcelona. So we're like an underdog, Brian. Celtic love to be an underdog, and hopefully we can bring an award back. It would be exceedingly pleasing and satisfying if we were to bring back the best charitable campaign. Harking back to December, where everybody pulled together to raise almost 27 grand for vulnerable groups of people back at Christmas time. And by the way, watch this space, because once we get back up the road, we will be announcing this year's charity drive as well. There will be another charity drive on a Celtic State of Mind. As I say, Brian, once you get some momentum and you get like-minded people of a Celtic State of Mind on the channel, and you grow it to the point where we are, going out to a great number of people every single day, then I think it's your responsibility to then utilise that and pull everything together. And it's just once a year that we do it, and we hopefully will raise another 5-figure sum for charity or charities leading up to this Christmas as well. So wish us luck, and I'll try and follow our progress on the train all the way down and on the night itself. So I won't be on tomorrow, but you will be seeing, for the first time ever, a new host. It'll be the first time that he or she will be hosting a Celtic State of Mind. And you will also see a brand new contributor as well tomorrow, standing in for myself and JP Mason, who won't be appearing. So I'll tell you all about it when I'm back. I might even pop my head on Friday. I'll certainly be back on Saturday for the game. So let's talk about the game a wee bit. Motherwell. I never ever go into these fixtures, Brian, at the best of times thinking, it's a certainty. I'm never so remiss of any team in the Scottish League. I've seen us going to just about every venue and struggling in the past. But Motherwell are on a good bit of form. They, for me, went under a kind of transformation under Stephen Robinson. They became a very handy outfit year on year. And I felt that he was operating prior to leaving the club. I think he's at Morecambe now, whereby he was building teams for them to be dismantled, and he was building teams again. But I think, that runs its course eventually. I think the manager bounce himself, the manager himself, it runs a course with them, and they can no longer do that. So every time he was able to find a player or a couple of players, they were getting sold to keep, obviously, the club ticking along. I think it's a very well-run club. I think Alan Burrows has got a lot of fans in Scottish football. There's a food bank collection before the game that I know Celtic fans will be all over. But they're doing well at this moment in time. They're above Celtic in the league, Brian. And the big question is, how do we approach the game? Do you think that with the international games in mind, there might be some changes to personnel on Saturday?
Possibly. I think, you also don't know what condition the players are coming back in. I would like us to play the same team we played against Aberdeen, because I thought Turnbull played better having McGregor next to him. I thought we looked a bit more solid in midfield with Beaton, which is something I didn't think I'd be saying at the start of the season. But I think he did, he gives a bit of physical presence, and he allows McGregor more forward. I'd like the front three to stay the same, probably, unless Kyogo's shattered. I think him, Shota and Abada together are a real headache for teams. And the thing is, Motherwell have been playing decent football, so that should, in theory, suit us, because they'll have a go. And again, I would keep the back, well, again, depending on fitness. I think I would start Juranovic if he was fit. Probably left back. And then you've got Montgomery can go off and get a wee spark off the bench. So you may see some changes, but I would probably keep it much the same. Because what you want is you just want the momentum to continue now.
Yes.
And look, seeing that, it sounds weirdly perverse to say, but the fact that we're so inconsistent now almost makes it a bit more exciting going into the game, because you're more nervous about it. Because normally if you're smashing teams every week, you sort of think, yeah, we've got a good win again. But there's an uncertainty of what Celtic are going to appear just now, which just isn't good. It's not good for the nerves. It's not good for the club, obviously, the way we're sitting at the table. But it does make me excited, because I'm curious to see the lineup. I'm curious to see how we perform. I'm desperate for us to get a win. It's no something we take for granted. And I almost feel like the past few games, every game is that old football cliche. It feels like a cup final. Every game starts to feel like a must-win. So, if you're going to put a positive spin on it, that's really exciting. And I'm so up for the game on Saturday. I can't wait. And I think we'll do it, but it's really important we do it, not just for the team, but to keep that momentum, because what you don't want after getting a bit of momentum is that break to hit, because if, God forbid, we drop points again, then there's the more questions, more pressure. Whereas the players start to get a bit of momentum now, we've got a clear on it things for a wee while. Hopefully injury free, most of the squad for the first time under Postecoglou. And he said about an extra couple of weeks of just intense training with them on the training part. So all signs are pointing in the right direction. I just hope that direction of travel gets fulfilled.
No, I think it's a fair point, and you've made it a few times on previous shows whereby you want to judge Ange Postecoglou when he's firing on all cylinders, Brian, and he's got a full complement of players. He's not had that. I mean, we've got some long-term absentees in Julian, James Forrest, of course, Dembele, who had been considered. Yeah, he's been considered as part of the first team squad again after last season. And Mikey Johnson, of course, as well. So to get any of these players back is going to be a bonus to Celtic. But one slight concern I've got, and again, is it succession planning? Probably, because we're not great at that. Scott Brown leaves Celtic, and I, at the time, said that because of the period of transition, you're losing the CEO, so you're losing the head of a department there. You're losing Neil Lennon, who's a head at the football club. And to lose a captain, I just felt it was a bridge too far to lose those three pivotal heads of departments, almost, if you like, from the football club. But he's gone, and that's happened. But one thing that I would say is I don't think we're clear on who is playing that number 6 role now. I mean, what is clear is that when it's utilised properly, it gives Callum McGregor the freedom to become more of an offensive issue for the opposition, and I think he plays better in that role anyway. But we need to have, I think, a clear idea of who fits that position. Now, against Aberdeen, hard-fought win up at Pittodrie, Nir Bitton, I feel, played well enough in that position, right? I mean, we could strip back his performance and say, well, he should have won the header that led to the Aberdeen goal. He should have scored the header of his own. But I just think generally he played fairly well in that position. I think that if you were to look at his game as a whole, and going back to what you said before, don't tinker with it too much. Does that mean for you, Bitton at the moment, your first choice number 6? And if so, where does it leave McCarthy and Sorrell at this moment in time?
Well, what's interesting about the number 6 position, and it ties into some of the criticisms of Ange. Some of the criticisms have been that, he's too stubborn to change, he only knows one way. But Nir Bitton is a very different number 6 for the number 6 that Callum McGregor is, right? And I think the Callum McGregor in that role suits the system better. But because, we don't have another box-to-box midfielder, Bitton, it's not as much what he provides to as a player what he gives to the team, it's what he allows other players to give to the team. I think McCarthy's probably the question mark, because you would assume that he's more mobile than Bitton. He's more, he's played at a higher level. He's a bit more experienced. He should be the starter. It really should be McCarthy, McGregor, Turnbull as your midfield 3, I would wager. Whether that's fitness, injuries, attitudes, I don't know. For some reason, he's not been playing that. So for the moment, until he's able to fulfil that role, it will be Bitton. But I fully suspect, I think, I don't want to misquote him, but it might have been Lawrence saying that he expects us to buy another defensive mid in January. I actually don't. I think we'll buy another attack, a more box to box, to allow McGregor to drift back into that deeper role, because I think that's the way it facilitates the team better. But for the moment, yeah, Bitton probably has to start.
I don't disagree.
Imagine seeing that couple of Bitton has to start.
Listen. Even at the beginning of the season after Midtjylland, there was plenty of Celtic fans who didn't want to see Bitton back in a Celtic jersey after the way he performed in that particular game. You're talking about box-to-box midfielder, and that's what Liam Shaw's been described as, and we've not seen him in a competitive game, which is a wee bit disappointing, because again, you want to see your full complement, you want to see all your different options that you have. But we're at that stage at the moment where, once you start getting that momentum, you don't want to tinker with the team. You just want to get the wins. We can't be too experimental, particularly against a side who's very strong at home. We can't be too experimental against Motherwell because, that might backfire. You've basically got to play your strongest side every single week. Just going back to one of the previous discussions, Will McMillan points out that we don't channel into the fan bases elsewhere. Yeah, absolutely. Australia, most other countries, including next door now. I do get the issues with travel, particularly where, we've just spoken at the beginning of the show, Brian, about there being no real break. And in particular with the early Champions League games, it's difficult to go anywhere that's of distance. But I mean, in terms of Ireland, I think that we should be visiting Ireland every single year. Without exception, we should be sending a Celtic team to represent Celtic in Ireland every single pre-season. I mean, without doubt. And we should be making efforts, and not just for the glam and the glitz of a big payday like we did against Real Madrid that time in the States. We should always be making efforts to tap into our American and our Australian fan bases, and the club should find a way of doing it, because it gets to that point where it's all fair and well selling yourself as this massive brand worldwide, but you've got to furnish that global fan base, Brian. You've got to engage with them. And we keep talking about this on ACSOM in relation to the membership scheme. It might not be possible for you to be a season ticket holder simply by default of geography, but you might be a passionate Celtic supporter nonetheless. How can you pay in apart from buying merchandise online? Well, become a member of the club. And there definitely needs to be a membership scheme where you can be part of the club, even if you can't buy a season ticket. So I would love to see developments with that. And of course, on the point of Australia, we do have Jared from time to time on ACSOM from Celts Down Under. He comes on and gives us that perspective as well. But moving on to the game then at the weekend, would you be quite happy then if we're going to have the same approach with a scrappy 2-1 win, Brian, coming home from Fir Park with a 2-1 victory?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you want to, you always want to play good football and good attacking football, obviously, but, you want the 3 points and you want to keep that momentum going. And I think that the more we get used to playing a certain way, the more confident we get the players to fit it, then the wins will come anyway. I think, a lot was made about, I think it was Ange himself who said he would rather, or no, it was Jota, I think, was saying the manager just wants the players to perform, he doesn't focus on the wins. But I think one follows the other, right? If you go out and you're playing really, really well, chances are you win. And I think Al Morrison, who done a brilliant job on Friday, went through the XGs and stuff like that, you can see the performance level was there. See, just on just a quick thought popped into my wee peanut brain there. See, for tuning into other markets like Australia and stuff like that, the membership thing would be great, right? You can almost have, I think it was Russell pitched it, like a kind of Netflix style Celtic TV package where you can watch the library of games. But how easy would it be for, when you say the games are on Celtic TV, just hire 2 guys in Australia and give them the Celtic set, and they can sit there at the halftime discussion about it, and then just edit that into the feed. Just things like that. Just get a couple of Australian voices on commentary over there, because you can watch the game and record. We could record the commentary track. No, they'd want to hear it, but we could record one, just put it over a game. It's no hard. Things like that, they could be cuter doing. Absolutely. Market, they should be, doing highlight packages of Kyogo before every game, getting them hyped up. Have a couple of Japanese correspondents in Japan recording it, and then send it over in real time to be edited into a live broadcast.
Absolutely.
Radio does it all the time.
Yeah.
You could be. There could be a story down here where I'm down south that affects something in Glasgow, and I'll just record it quickly, send it over. They put it in, and it's as if I'm there live. So there's to be different things they can do, but the commentator's absolutely spot on. It's right. We need to be cute about these things. Even in America, we've got a massive fan base in America. And we don't. It's not just about going over there. It's why not make me many docs about Celtics in America and American Celtic players, stuff like that. Like there's so much they could be doing to just engage more. But then they don't do much to engage with us here in Scotland or in Britain. So that might be a bit adventurous to expect them to go to Japan.
It's ambitious, but you know what? ACSOM might have to go international and do it if it doesn't happen at the club. So there you go.
I've got my best Australian accent.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've got enough players, ex-players, over in these places in Australia. I mean,
he's there, isn't he? Still.
Scott McDonald's over there and Paul McStay. Absolutely. Japan, you've got Nakamura, and So yeah, it is doable. Just fresh ideas, Brian. That's what we're talking about. But just to finish off, we've been talking about the inner workings of Celtic Football Club, the structure, the future ownership of the club. There's a wee bit of football thrown in as well. Not very much negativity, Brian. I can't see any complaints about negativity. So thanks everybody for getting involved. I'm looking at your comments as they come in, and also. I was reading the other day, and I love this. I love these kind of wee tips, or maybe I shouldn't love it. Olivier Giroud has written his life story, and often what you get is all these wee tidbits of information about what might have been. And he was talking about Celtic's interest in signing him back in 2010, and that, the mind boggles as to what Giroud achieved after his transfer to Montpellier. So I was doing a wee bit of digging today, and the videographer within a State of Mind studio, Kelvin's got a much better knowledge of English football than I do. So we had a wee chat about it. So he signs for Montpellier on the 1st of July 2010 for £1.8 million, Brian. On the same day that we signed Gary Hooper from Scunthorpe for £2.61 million. And Gary Hooper, by the way, I thought was a great acquisition for Celtic. And as a club, he fitted our model because we doubled our money on him. So as a club, we were quite happy with him. And he scored and he was prolific. But you still think what might have been. Giroud apparently wanted Celtic above all the other teams that were interested until he has a conversation with the Montpellier president, who basically mocks Kilmarnock and says, you don't want to go and play Kilmarnock. And he mocks them. What was that?
It wasn't Fergus McCann, was it?
Well, he scuppered the Ginola deal. Yeah, you're right. Another Frenchman. Spot on. But I'm looking at that season. That was the season when we finished second. That was the first full season under Neil Lennon. He had taken over just before, obviously, after the demise of Tony Mowbray, and he had seen us through the final 8 or 9 games of the season. And then he gets the job permanently. This is his first season. This is the season where we signed the likes of Gary Hooper and Charlie Mulgrew and Chaduri, etc. And I know that it's not as simple as, he would have had and enjoyed the same success at Celtic that he had at Montpellier. I know that because I've spoken about various players in the past. But the mind does boggle because that season we finished second. But the next season was the first of the 9, and I do sometimes go into that Kevin Graham mould of, alternative realities and think, well, dearie me, for £2 million, we could have had Olivier Giroud. The mind boggles. What other players spring to mind of what might have been, Brian? Players that Celtic were pretty close to signing, we didn't, and they've gone on. I mean, he went on to win a World Cup.
I'm not sure if I'm right. Did Ibrahimovic, did we have a look at him when he was...
A couple of £1 million, aye.
Yeah, Ajax, wasn't he? Before we went out. I remember Ibrahimovic was one. It'd be good to have another legendary Swede up front. Someone said Lewandowski, apparently when he was younger, we looked at him. I don't know if that's true or no, so that might just be pub talk, but I'm sure Lewandowski, and obviously Coleman as well, Seamus Coleman, we could have got him for 50 grand. And, maybe they'd be worried about a right back problems we've had. But then we might never have got big handsome Lustig, so swings and roundabouts, I suppose. But it's amazing, and obviously a Scottish guy, McGinnon, Stephen Fletcher, which is probably still a source. And
McCarthy. Let's not forget McCarthy.
Scotland could have had McCarthy as a centre midfielder if they'd locked up their ideas quicker, but Ireland got in there first, so there's so many in there. You should make a programme and just do like a fantasy 11 of what ifs. Do a couple of teams for a couple of years and see how it works.
It is interesting because I know there is no exact science. I know that they don't always come your way, etc. But the guys you've mentioned for a starting point should even throw in Ivan Toney into the mix as well. Shay Given was at the club. Shay Given was at the club. Spoke about it recently. But there's a famous picture of Given on a training ground with Joe Corrigan, the goalkeeper coach, and it's Gordon Marshall, Pat Bonner, Stuart Kerr, Shay Given, and Brad Friedel, who was in on trial at the time. We didn't sign him either. But for a few trialists that could have done a job. John Harkes, whose son, of course, scored against Celtic for Dundee United the other week. We had him on trial. But we balked at the transfer fee. You want to know how much it was, Brian? 90 grand. 90 grand. He goes and signs for Sheffield Wednesday, and he builds an impressive career. There has been so many, of course. Alfredo Di Stefano could have signed for Celtic. We signed Jimmy McGrory went over to sign him. The interpreter was John Cushley, who spoke fluent Spanish. He was a Celtic centre half, also a school teacher, but he didn't sign. It goes on and on. Seriously, the mind boggles. But the one I love is the Ronaldinho story. So everybody knows that Ronaldinho was offered to St Mirren on trial, and I can't remember why they refused him. They're probably regretting it now. But he was playing alongside Raphael Scheidt when we went over to watch him in a number of games. And you just think, for the money that we spent on Raphael, 5 million quid reported, the next move Ronaldinho got from Grêmio, I think it was, or was it? It was Grêmio. It was 2.5 million. He left for 2.5 million quid.
It's startling. Just it's there's so many sliding doors moments when we got Stephen Pearson instead of James McFadden as well. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Imperial done all right, but it's amazing what people were thinking at the time, and it's the what ifs in it. But you just have to hope that some of the guys we sign in the future are going to be as good as your Ronaldinho's.
You know what? It is what ifs, and obviously Rivaldo balked at the fact that he was offered a trial by Martin O'Neill. I always found that hilarious. World Cup winner, I come on trial, and of course De La Pena and Danny, who we spoke about as well, who were on trial and played against Livingston and Dundee. And De La Pena particularly went on to some great success. Danny never kicked another ball competitively ever again. He chucked the game to be a model and a jet setter and a playboy. So there you go. I just found that very interesting. You wonder how many other stories of that type are out there in relation to buys that we could have had. But it is a buy. It's a good buy from myself and also from Brian Dednan. I won't be on that ACSOM Bulletin tomorrow, but it will go ahead as normal. You will be joined by a brand new host. You will recognise their face, but it's the first time they've hosted the show. And he will have a brand new contributor to talk about all things Celtic. As I say, thanks everybody for your support. It really is appreciated. You're sending us down to London next week and tomorrow, in fact. And hopefully we'll bring the trophies back, at least one. It would be lovely to bring it back on behalf of everybody out there who supports a Celtic state of mind.